But did you girls have fun today? 12 days of Christmas setting up decorations. We have inflatable dinosaurs on the front porch of the church. I got to get a picture and show you that. Come on down and visit Dinosaur Adventure Land, Lenox, Alabama, where God gets the glory for his creation instead of the stupid evolution religion. You can follow us on Rumble in case YouTube shuts me off again. Okay? Genesis Baptist Church on YouTube for now. Odyssey and a bunch of places on drdino.com. Call 855-BIG-DINO if you have any questions. Extension 4 is our tech guy. Extension 3 is me. Bobby, your extension 0. And what do you do around here? Oh. If you want to order our materials, a videotape called Extension 1. Let's see. Tonight, December 13th, 2023. Whack an atheist. I don't know that Paul is an atheist, Anderson, but he certainly promotes evolution at Bozeman Science in Montana. So, Paul, this is for your own good. We're going to whack you. And I'm going to dedicate this program tonight to a lady named Joe who has some very serious health problems in Fort Myers, Florida. Talk to her today. Joe, you and I were taught the same thing about evolution and the geologic column, and this is what Paul's going to be teaching tonight. Is it possible for a lot of people to believe something that's simply not true? How many Muslims are there in the world? How many people followed Hitler? How many people followed the Japanese, World War II? It's history of humanity to have huge groups of millions of people believe something wrong. We'll talk about that in a minute. We're at Genesis Baptist Church in Lenox, Alabama. Right there. Old-fashioned, independent, temperamental, fundamental, right-wing, radical, chicken-eating Baptist church. The Bible says, don't be deceived, don't be deceived, don't be deceived. I think people are deceived about evolution. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. Whatsoever man soweth, that shall he also reap. We're straight north of Pensacola, Florida. Joe, if you want to come up, bring your husband, bring everybody. Come on up, visit Dinosaur Adventure Land in Lenox, Alabama, where God gets the glory. We have 140 acres, all kinds of cool stuff to do here, and teach about God's amazing creation. Come for your honeymoon. Let's see. Paul Anderson, Bozeman Science. Tonight is also the Geminid meteor shower. If it's not cloudy out, you want to get up on the sand dune, tonight you ought to see a bunch of shooting stars, okay? All right there, Paul. You can help us stay open for free. Join our 777 clubs. I like what you're doing, Brett Hovind. I'm going to give $1 a day, $31 a month. Give up a cup of coffee or a cigarette or something and be able to support $1 a day, okay, for the ministry. If you're a member of our 777, be sure to call my wife, Sandra, to check because one of our tech guys was diverting funds. Make sure they're going to the right place. We think we got all the leaks stopped, but just in case, check with her at 855-BIG-DINO extension 1. Okay, Dr. Dino. Open 7.66 years for free. Come on up. Oh, I did it in there twice again. BozemanScience.com. Evidence of evolution. Hi, it's Mr. Anderson. And in this podcast, I'm going to talk about evidence for evolution. He has done a lot of programs with nearly 1 million views on evolution. Bozeman Science, natural selection, evidence for evolution, 300,000 views. Evolution continues. The origin of life. Wow, 300,000 views. One guy said, you just taught me more in 13 minutes than my biology teacher could ever teach me in a lifetime. Thank you. Keep up the good work. These are comments off of his channel. He's influencing a lot of people. And Paul, I'm here to help you. You're going to be in trouble when you stand before God because you're influencing them to believe something that is wrong. I'll show you, okay? I got to thank you. You saved me in physics, microbiology, psychology, and now evolution. Bless your soul. Well, or whatever it is, he didn't save you if he got you to believe in evolution, okay? On the side note, were those different finches Darwin found on the islands different species as a result of natural selection? Like it would be possible to bring different island finches together and have them breed? This whole thing of evolution, if you're teaching somebody something that's not true, you're going to be in trouble. The Lord said in Matthew 18, whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Be not many masters, knowing we shall receive the greater condemnation. Paul, in a minute, is going to talk about the different kinds of pigeons. All those pigeons descended from a common ancestor. Wow. Anybody want to guess what it was? Frog. Yep. A pigeon. Okay. This video was very helpful. My class didn't have enough time to go into evolution much, so it was great for me to know more about the topic. Okay, well, let's let Paul talk for a minute, and I'll stop and interrupt and correct the record. Let's see, I want to get to this one. I got to push the button over here. I need y'all to feel sorry for me, okay? There was a little piece of broken plastic in the shower when I went to adjust the shower head. I cut both of my index fingers. Those are the only those are the only fingers I know how to type with. I type Columbus style, where you find it and land on it. So can we hear a little sympathy? You know, like, oh, oh, thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, here we go. I have a hard time moving the mouse around. Here.
Hi, it's Mr. Anderson, and in this podcast, I'm going to talk about evidence of evolution. Evidence laid down by this guy, who you all probably know as Charles Darwin. Who you don't know is this guy over here. This is Alfred Wallace, and these two both came up with the same exact idea that the diversity of life on our planet comes through the process of evolution, and the mechanism by which that occurred is natural selection. Now, why don't any of us know Alfred Wallace? Well, if you're interested in the story of Darwin, a great read would be David Quammen's The Reluctant Mr. Darwin. David Quammen actually lives here in Bozeman. I've met him. He's fascinating author, but basically lays out the life of Charles Darwin as this scientist who loved to work on the minutiae of science.
Darwin was not a scientist. He had only degree he ever got was in religion. He was a preacher. His dad was worried about his son Charlie because he was a dud. His dad was a medical doctor. Charlie was a lazy slob. And so Dad sent him off to be a preacher for the Anglican Church so he could get around and get paid, sit around and get paid and not do anything, like the pirates who don't do anything, okay? Don't call him a scientist. Darwin was a preacher. That's the only degree he got. He was not a scientist, okay? Let's see. Here we go. Right here. Come on. I got to find a finger that doesn't hurt. There we go. Try that one. Okay.
And gather data over years and years and years and years to eventually support his idea, support his theory of natural selection. And he did that. For 30 years, he sat on the idea of evolution and natural selection, and he never published anything until he got a letter from this guy, Alfred Wallace, who'd gone on a similar journey to Southeast Asia, discovered the same exact thing, wrote a letter to Darwin. Darwin freaked out. They publish a letter together, and Darwin kind of gets all his ducks in a row and publishes On the Origin of Species, where he lays out evidence of evolution. Since Darwin started first and had kind of established this theory, had first, and he also knew a lot of really powerful people. We remember his name. But it doesn't take away from his work. It's amazing. So The Origin of Species, basically, he lays out evidence for evolution and then a means by which that occurs, and that is now.
Now, keep in mind, I'm going to not interrupt as much, Paul, but you got to define what you mean by evolution, okay? I do that. There are 6 different levels or stages, and atheists get mad about that. They say cosmic evolution is not part of it. Yes, it is. You have to have something to evolve. Where did the dirt come from? Where did time, space, matter come from? Chemical evolution, stellar evolution, organic evolution. How did life get started? You guys want to start with living things and watch how they vary, and then claim the Big Bang and everything else along with it. You try to sneak all that together, don't you? That's okay. Go ahead. I guess I got to have a finger without a Band-Aid to make it.
Natural selection. So here's him coming up with the idea. So this is in one of his notes. Today. And explain how this could occur, because a number of scientists have said this before, and he lays out a real persuasive argument in The Origin of the Species. And so he starts, without talking about nature at all, he starts by talking about something that all of us can see within our lifetime, or at least throughout generations. He starts with the pigeon. And if you look at this pigeon right here, this pigeon was bred selectively by humans to create a number of different pigeons. So let's look at all these different types of pigeons, from this red pigeon to this white.
How many of those would survive in nature, Paul? The people who are pigeon fanciers, they call them, don't you have to babysit them? Because if you let them go, they're going to die, okay? They're genetically inferior to the original pigeon. So anyway, it's true. Same with dogs. How long would chihuahuas last in the woods? 10 minutes? The squirrels would eat them, okay?
White pigeon to this really crazy beaked pigeon, all of these have the same DNA as that original pigeon. Now there's going to be some variation, that's why we get all these differences, but most people wouldn't think that these all came from that same pigeon. And so
most people wouldn't think all the pigeons came from a rock either.
It's a great piece of evidence that if we could do this in just hundreds of years using artificial selection, surely we could do this in nature using millions of years. And so then he's...
there you go. Slip it in. Millions of years. Paul, what you guys teach is that all these varieties of pigeons had a common ancestor, and it was in this one lifetime by artificial selection. I agree. And then you want people to imagine SpongeBob style. Got SpongeBob behind me here. Okay. You want them to imagine if we had millions of years, that would prove pigeons are related to frogs. Aren't they? And pine trees. Oh, yeah. And you can see the similarity between a frog and a pine tree. Sure. You guys go nuts over this. Yes, there's variations of pigeons, and they're still pigeon. God said they'd bring forth after their kind. That's all they've ever done. There's Darwin's voyage here, right there. Come on.
He starts talking about nature. The first thing he talks about is the idea of biogeography. And this is the one thing that struck him, because he went on a 3-year tour where he sailed from Europe. He ended up down here in...
That's because Daddy didn't want to feed him at home because he wouldn't do anything. The ship had to feed him, or the shipmaster. Okay.
South America, they bounced around South America. They went across the Galapagos, sailed across the Pacific, went to Australia, went to all of these islands, eventually came back to South America and to Europe. And that whole way he saw life, but he saw life not the same everywhere. In other words, in Australia, he's going to see marsupial mammals. But if you look in North America, we're not going to have any marsupial mammals except for the possum. And so what biogeography is where life is found. And because before Darwin, all scientists believed in special creativity, that God simply placed everything perfectly evolved where it lived. That's what the scientists believed. He started to question that when he went.
That is not true. God gave all the original creatures the ability to produce a variety of offspring, so some can survive in different climates. God didn't place the marsupial animals in Australia. Okay, the whole world is full of everything, and they're able to produce. How many of you have more than one child and they're different from each other? Anybody? They're different, right? You get them the same way, you feed them the same food, and they turn out different. Okay. Okay, different finger. There. Ow. Different finger.
Went to the Galapagos, for example, and found that there were only one type of bird there, the finches. That there were only the tortoises there, but you didn't have mammals, you didn't have goats and pigs, and all those things weren't there naturally. And they also had adapted to each of the individual islands. The natives here could tell them, they could identify what island a tortoise comes from just by the shape of its shell. And you can see right away that there's clear differences between these. In other words, this one right here is the last living tortoise from Pinta Island. This is Lonesome George. He has a really long neck. How did he get a long neck? Not by stretching it, Darwin said, but on Pinta Island, where there's not a lot of vegetation, basically tortoises that had a longer neck were able to get more vegetation, and so their genes were passed on. Likewise, this down here is from Santa Cruz, this tortoise. And so there probably are tortoises born on Santa Cruz that have a really long neck, but predators can eat it because there's plenty of food. The big selective pressure ends up being the predators. And so we have a bell-shaped curve of neck length on tortoises, but it's going to vary depending on what the island is. And so Darwin lays out a compelling argument that life is different no matter where you go, and it has to do with chance and how it got there. It just wasn't just added there. Next, he talks about fossils, and he collected fossils.
Okay, let me stop right there, Paul, and let me explain something where you're way off target and don't even understand it. Let's see. Right here, slide number 1321, Alt-DV, 1321, enter. Charlie Darwin sailed around the world on board the Beagle. He was 22 years old, okay? Just got out of Bible college. Let me get over here. Okay. Let's see. December 27th, coming up, anniversary, HMS Beagle sailed from England to survey the coast of South America. On board as the ship's unpaid naturalist. That's a stretch, okay? He was called the ship's captain's companion because the captain in the British Navy that wasn't allowed to talk much couldn't socialize with the sailors. So they had to send somebody along to, play chess with him and, drink with him, whatever they did, okay? Darwin was the ship's captain's companion. Unpaid naturalist. I don't know where you got that. Even if they gave him that title, he wasn't a naturalist. He just got out of Bible college. Okay. Graduated from Cambridge University with a degree in what? Yeah, religion. Darwin's observations during his 5 years at sea would eventually change the way we would think of ourselves and our world. Now, that's true. The son of a wealthy doctor, Darwin was not an attentive student, spending more time outdoor than in school. A medical student in University of Edinburgh, he was horrified by operations which were performed without anesthetic. Not fun to watch, okay? You got to hold them down while you sew them up, stuff like that. For 2 years, Darwin skipped lectures to spend time collecting biological specimens. Why don't you say he collected bugs, okay? In desperation, his father sent him to Cambridge to train to be a minister. After graduating from Cambridge, Darwin was recommended for one of the professors for the position of the Beagle. Okay, there we go. So Darwin sailed around. He got to the Galapagos Islands. On the Galapagos Islands, he did not see any evidence for evolution. All he saw was 14 varieties of finches. All finches, a bird. Darwinism is the theory of biological evolution developed by English naturalist Charles Darwin and others, stating that all species of organisms arise and develop through the natural selection of small inherited variations. Well, you better define what you mean by the word species. Got 26 different definitions. Search it out. Check the internet. 26 definitions of species that increase the individual's ability to compete, survive, and reproduce. Okay. Theory of evolution by natural selection, first formulated in Darwin's book On the Origin of Species in 1859, is the process by which organisms change over time as a result of changes in the heritable physical or behavioral traits. Changes that allow an organism to better adapt to its environment will help it survive and have more offspring. Darwin's revolutionary theory was that new species arise naturally by a process of evolution, rather than having been created forever immutable by God. Immutable means unchangeable. The Bible never says they were unchangeable. God said they would bring forth after their kind. And the 8 kinds of bears in the world might have had a common ancestor called a bear. And the 14 varieties of finches probably had a common ancestor called a finch. So they mischaracterized the biblical teaching to make it look silly, and they glamorized Charlie's teaching to make it look right. And all he saw was variations of the same kind. Exactly what the Bible said would happen. They bring forth after their kind. All those pigeons are still a bird. They're still the same kind of animal. Let's see. The well-established creationist theory of Darwin's day. The exquisite adaptations of many species, such as hinges of the bivalve shell and the wings and plumes on seeds dispersed by air, were compelling evidence that a designer had created each species for its intended place in the economy. That's a little stretch. God gave each species the ability to produce a variety so some could survive in cold weather, hot, warm weather. Thicker furred animals, they still have furs. Thin-haired dogs like a dingo can survive in the desert. And the wolf can survive in the Arctic. They're still the same. They're still a dog. Okay, let's see. Darwin had wholeheartedly accepted this theory, talking about creation, which was bolstered by the biblical account in Genesis, until his experiences in the Galapagos Islands began to undermine this way of thinking. Darwin, age 22, fresh out of school to be a preacher, set sail on HMS Beagle in 1831. He brought a book with him to read, hot off the press, Principles of Geology. Can you see that book right there beside you? Is it right there? Principles of Geology up on screen here. Maybe I got it back here. What? I'm not seeing it. Anyway, I got it. Okay. Is it behind the family tree? No, not there. That's all right. No problem. In this book, Principles of Geology, Charles Lyell, by the way, Reverend Henson had given it to Darwin and recommended him to read it but not believe it, okay? In this Lyell book changed Darwin's life and millions, actually probably billions more around the world. Darwin said, he wrote a letter to Russell, the disbelief crept over me at a very slow rate. At last complete. The rate was so slow I felt no distress. I have never since doubted, even for a second, that my conclusion was correct. I can hardly see how anyone ought to wish Christianity to be true. If so plain language of the text seems to show that men who do not believe, like my father, brother, and almost all my friends, would be everlastingly punished in hell, this is a damnable doctrine. Darwin dedicated his second edition to Charles Lyell, the lawyer from Scotland who hated the Bible. Charles Lyell invented what we call today the geologic column. In November 14th, 1797, Charles Lyell, a British lawyer, the foremost geologist of his day, was born. Now, Joe, you said to me today on the phone when we talked that you wanted to be a paleontologist, study all this kind of stuff about the fossils. This guy, Charles Lyell, made up the geologic column, that the layers are different ages. It doesn't exist anywhere except in the textbook. I'll show you. Lyell was a close friend of Charles Darwin and is best known as the author of Principles of Geology, okay, the strata, which popularized James Hutton's concepts of uniformitarianism. The idea that the Earth was shaped by the same process still in operation today. Okay. Lyell saw himself as the spiritual savior of geology to free the science from the old dispensation of Moses. What does that mean? See, up until that time, everybody taught the flood made all the layers to the earth, which it did. Okay? Lyell came along and said, oh no, they formed slowly over millions of years. The friendship grew even though Lyell rejected the theory of evolution that Darwin deeply believed in. It took 9 editions of principles of Lyell's principles and years of discussion with Darwin to finally grant Darwin's theories of evolution some respect. And at the end, he even supported Darwin to publish his masterpiece, Origin of Species. Joe, there is no such thing as a geologic column. It's pure fiction. The layers cannot possibly be different ages. Stop and think for a minute. Where's all this new material coming from? If the top layer is younger, did it come from outer space? Every speck of dirt on the planet is the same age, whether it's 6,000 or 6 trillion. They're all the same age. Moving it from here to here doesn't change the age of it. I say this all the time. You atheists never answer. If I shuffle a deck of cards, is the top card now younger because I moved it? Why is the Holocene dirt younger than the Cretaceous dirt? Why? It's all the same. Is it coming from outer space? Just answer. Where's it coming from? Is it possible for millions of people to believe something that is not true? How many millions of people walk around that rock that fell down from Jupiter or whatever they think and think it's a sign from God? Whole bunch. And they will kill you for not believing that if you're in their country. Is it possible for millions of people to get duped by Adolf Hitler? 55 million people followed that guy. And it's not true. Superior species should rule the world. And they took off in China and a bunch of Philippine islands and all that stuff. Let's see. This geologic column does not exist. But if you think of it that way, if that becomes your Bible, you start to think, well, back millions of years ago. There is no millions of years ago. If you shake a jar of dirt, water, mud, and it'll settle into layers in a few seconds. All the layers are the same age. They just settle out. I flip these things over all the time on my table here, these sand art toys, and they will make multiple layers in a matter of a few minutes. It does not, the layers are all the same age. They're all in here at the same time. There is no geologic column. How can the top layer be younger? Did it come from outer space? But this geologic column is taught in all the earth science books now. I taught earth science 15 years. It's taught in all those books saying, wow, the layers, and poor kids got to memorize these dumb names, Jurassic, Triassic, Mississippian, Devonian, Silurian, Cretaceous. It doesn't exist. It's all baloney. Now, it's a fact the earth has layers. The evolution says the layers form slowly over millions of years. Creationist says the layers are all from the flood of Noah. Just the tide going up and down while Noah's in the ark is going to make the water rush in and out and make all these layers in 1 year. But evolutionists always try to erase the line between their interpretation and the fact. It's a fact the earth has layers. That's a fact. It is not a fact the layers are different ages. The geologic column is the Bible for the evolutionists. It can only be found one place in the world, the textbook. This textbook author admitted it, probably got fired for it, if there were a column of sediments. Unfortunately, no such column exists. There is no such thing. If it did, it'd be 100 miles thick. Darwin didn't like round numbers, so he made it more exact numbers. He said the Wealden deposits in England were 306,662,400 years old. So that'd be, just see, 540, 50 some now. Okay. All over the world, petrified trees are found standing up, running through the layer. Now, Joe, I told you I would mention this. and show you petrified trees in the vertical position. Now stop and think. How long does a dead tree stand around in Fort Myers? Couple years. Petrified trees in the standing position indicate, and they're running through all these layers. I think if all the layers formed in 1 year, like I said, with the flood pumping up and down, with the tide going up and down during Noah's flood, and the water rushing back and forth, filling the tidal bump, it's called tidal pumping, it would form all the layers in 1 year around standing trees that then petrify and turn to stone, standing up, running through all the layers. See, Christians and creationists don't have a problem with these petrified trees at all. Polystrata fossil passing through sedimentary rock suggests rapid deposition. Joggins, Nova Scotia. They're found all over the world. These are in a state park in Washington. Petrified trees standing up. And why are they telling this? Let's see, these are in Greece. They're all over the world. Petrified trees in the vertical position. But Darwin got to these islands right here off the coast of South America, the Galapagos Islands, like Paul showed. And he said he counted 14 varieties of finches. Look at the top finch. The beak is real heavy duty. That came from the island where the only thing to eat was nuts that are hard to crack. And so the birds that had a skinny beak, they couldn't survive there. They either died or moved someplace where they found food they could eat. So the heavy beak birds thrived on this island where the nuts were hard to crack. The Grants went down there. Hope Biology did an article on, right here. Peter and Rosemary Grant went down to the islands and spent 10 years there studying Darwin's finches, measuring the beak size. They found during dry years, the beak was 1/10 of 1 millimeter thicker. How much is 1/10 of a millimeter? And then during wet years, it was right back to regular size again. Because during dry years, the nuts are harder to crack. How does the work of Peter and Rosemary Grant illustrate natural selection? They were distinguished for their remarkable long-term study demonstrating evolution in action. No, they did not. They showed a variety of beak shapes on a bunch of birds and spent a whole lot of money living down there for 10 years for free. They demonstrated how very rapid changes in body and beak shape in response to changes in the food supply are driven by natural selection. I agree. Natural selection can select certain animals to make it, and others just simply can't make it. Doesn't make it change to something else, though. How many types of finches are there in the world? 228 species of finches. Who'd have thunk it? Darwin saw 14 varieties of finches on the island and concluded they came from a common ancestor. I would agree, Charlie. It's called a bird. And then Darwin, in his book, Origin of Species, said, on page 170 in my edition, it's a truly wonderful fact that all animals and all plants throughout all time and space should be related to each other. Charlie, you see 14 kinds of finches and conclude that finches are related to frogs and mosquitoes and bacteria? Who would come up with a dumb idea like that? Darwin observed microevolution, which is a lousy term, we shouldn't use it. He observed variation within the kind. I agree. Dogs produce a variety of dogs, that's a fact. Roses produce a variety of roses, that's a fact. It doesn't prove the dog and the rose are related. The dog, the wolf, the coyote, and the banana. I put them all up in front of a 4-year-old, so which one is not like the others? I've only ever had one kid get it wrong. They all say the banana. Again, brother, so, okay. One kid said, the boy. Good point, kid. The boy's not like the others, okay? But a child can tell you the dog, wolf, and coyote are the same kind of animal. The Bible says they would bring forth after their kind. That's all we've ever seen. Let me let Paul talk again for a minute here. So, Paul, I'm sorry, you are simply mistaken. That is not evolution. It's a variation of the finch. That's all Darwin saw. That's all anybody's ever seen. Anything else is imagination. They line up these fossils like you're going to do here and claim because we can put them in some kind of order, therefore that proves something. I could arrange all kinds of things in order. It doesn't prove anything of a relationship. I can even draw lines between them. There you go. Go ahead. Find a finger that works. There.
the whole way. That was one of the big things he's brought back all of these fossils to England. And he was able to lay out evolution. He was able to show how certain organisms changed into other organisms. So a great example would be the horse.
Paul, laying out fossils does not prove one changed into another. Think about it. When you find fossils in the dirt, all you could prove is it died. You don't know it changed to anything else. But it starts with that stupid geologic column. Because they find this one below this one, therefore this one came from that one. You don't know any such thing. A freshman law student would tear that open in court and say, "God, Your Honor, you can't prove this turned into this. You could prove this and this both died." That's all you could prove. Evolution is not science, it's a religion.
So the horse essentially went from an animal that's kind of like a deer where it was living in the forest.
You don't know the horse went from a deer up to the modern horse. They arranged a bunch of bones in order and called it science. They drew lines between them. That's not science, it's artwork. You don't know any of these fossils had any children. You certainly don't know they had children that lived or children that were different. No animal today can produce children that are different enough to call it a new kind. No, let him talk.
And it was kind of a browser, and then it moved and over millions of years became a grazer. And you can see that its size got large.
You do not know that, Paul. Stop lying to your audience. You don't know it changed into a grazer. All you know is they found fossils in the dirt. The teeth were different. Maybe that one is a grazer on top, okay? It doesn't prove it changed from something else, though. How can you not see that?
And its teeth changed and its legs changed. And so the fossil evidence that Darwin had was not great back then, but it still was compelling enough to make the argument for evolution. Since this time, you can think, we're talking about hundreds of years, we've gathered so many fossils that in science, we've gathered so much evidence.
Paul, there are museums with probably millions and millions of fossils. We have a whole bunch of fossils here. Guess what? They don't talk. They don't have a date on them, and you don't see them changing into anything else. That's not science, Paul. You're giving a fairy tale story here at Bozeman science. Why don't you stick with science? This isn't science you're telling us here. This is storytelling.
Evidence, so much fossil evidence that in science, evolution.
If you think there's evidence for evolution, Paul, I, Kent Hovind, lowly teacher here in Lenox, Alabama, challenge you to a debate. We can do it on our channel, your channel, Standing for Truth, neutral channel. I will debate you. You give the evidence for evolution. Give the one best evidence. After I debunk that, you can give a second one or a third one or fourth one. One topic at a time, no interrupting. You go first. What's the best single evidence for evolution? And no fossil would count as evidence for evolution. You don't know it had any children. You're making up a story. It's imagination.
Is pretty much accepted as fact. There's not a lot of scientists who would ever question it.
Well, I don't know that that's true, and you don't know that that's true either. Maybe it's like Nazi Germany. How many people dared speak up against Hitler when Hitler was in charge? Nobody, man. You'd lose your head, okay? How many people speak up against a communist dictator in China right now? How many people speak in Muslim countries? Go ahead and speak out against Islam. See how that does. In America, you speak out against atheism and evolution. You won't get published in the science journals, that's for sure, because it doesn't go along with the established theory. This isn't science. This is religious belief. This is majority opinion. This is peer pressure, but it's not science. Science tells us dogs produce dogs every time. And the similarity between bone structures you're about to share proves a common designer, not a common ancestor. We're way over time. You can watch the rest of Paul's speech. That was 6 out of 9 minutes here. So, Joe, you were taught what I was taught. Okay, I'm sorry you got lied to. The Bible says very clearly, the animals will bring forth after their kind. Nobody has ever seen anything other than that. 24 times in the first 7 chapters, God said they'd bring forth after their kind. What they're doing is a snow job here. This word evolution has 6 different meanings. You have to have cosmic evolution, the origin of time, space, matter. Where did matter come from? Where did energy come from? Where did space come from? Then you have to have chemical evolution, where all the elements come from hydrogen, from the Big Bang, maybe lithium and a little bit of helium, okay? Then you have to have stars evolving. Nobody's ever seen a star form, ever. Never seen one form. There's enough stars that everybody on Earth could own 11 trillion of them to yourself. Those are the ones we know about. We don't know about the ones that we don't know about. There could be more. Yeah, okay? 11 trillion to your, every person could own 11 trillion stars. Then you have to have organic evolution. Life has to get started somehow. They don't know how that happened. Then you'd have to have macroevolution where you change to a different kind. Nobody's ever seen that. We've never seen a cow produce a non-cow. Then you have microevolution. That's variations within the kind. That's all Charlie observed. That's all anybody's ever observed. That one is science. The first 5 are purely religious, not science. So, Paul, my challenge, you folks on watch his channel, challenge him for me. Call up Bozeman Science. Say, Ken Hovind challenged you to a debate. Sweetly and Christian. Better yet, Paul, come down here to Lenox, Alabama. I tell you what, I think I could afford to pay for part of your airplane ticket, $250 worth. You fly down here to Pensacola Airport. We'll pick you up, put you up here to one of our cabins. You can debate me right here on our channel, or I'll just give you the Science Center tour. I'd like you to quit lying. You don't know you're lying, okay? But you are. You're lying to the students that you're teaching, telling them there's evidence for evolution when there isn't any. I would help correct that for you. I'm the best friend you got, and you don't even know it. All right, any questions or comments?
Yes, sir.
I see Mexico shaped like a shofar, and the influx of immigrants as it's blowing America off the map. Anyway, I don't know. A little stretch. The shape of a continent is pure coincidence based on the water level. So, okay. Ken, as soon as we die, do we stand before God, and are we in the bodily form? To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So I don't think we're in a bodily form. I don't know. The Bible doesn't give all the details. At least I haven't seen it. When you die, the instant you die, if you're saved, you're present with the Lord. Now, if you're not saved, you're going to be awaiting Judgment Day. See, hell is the holding place until Judgment Day, and then you go to the lake of fire. Just like if you commit a crime, they arrest you, they put you in jail. Jail's for temporary holding, usually less than 1 year. Then you go to trial. After trial, if you're found guilty, they don't put you back in jail, they put you in prison, which is for long-term holding. So hell is the temporary place until the judgment of God, and then you go to the lake of fire. Okay? Thank you, sir. Let's see. The rapture and second coming are 2 different things, right? Okay, I'll show you. The second coming of Christ has 2 parts to it. My chart you can get for $10 on a Dr.Dino.com about end times. We cover that. Let's see. All right. It's backwards in the camera, brother. It's a little difficult here for an old man. Jesus, this little yellow stripe, here's the coming of Christ the first time. And here we are during the age of the Gentiles, 2,000 years. This little 7-year yellow stripe is greatly expanded up here. Jesus comes down only as far as the clouds and calls up the Christians. We go to the marriage supper of the Lamb, and while the wrath of God is poured out on the world. Then Jesus comes down the second time all the way to the earth. This time we come with him, and he comes on a white horse. We touch down, and the battle of Armageddon takes place. So the second coming of Christ has two phases. They call it the first advent and the second advent. The first advent is coming only as far as the clouds. This one, he comes all the way and touches down and sets up his kingdom and reigns for 1,000 years. Satan is cast into the pit during this 1,000 years. He's released at the end. All the Bible verses are on here. These charts are $10. And he's released, and then he's able to gather an army again. So apparently, during this 1,000-year period, there's going to be people who survived the wrath of God, and they live right on, still producing kids and grandkids and great-grandkids. Christians are going to be ruling and reigning with him. Ruling and reigning over who? Over what? Over the heathen. So there's still 2 types of people. God is still not willing that any should perish. He wants them saved. Satan raises an army at the end, and way back here, you have the final battle where Satan is cast into hell. That's where we start, into the lake of fire. So, hope that helps. Thank you for the question. Sorry it took so long. We get my series, Whoa, What on Earth is About to Happen, where we cover that in great detail, 21 hours of teaching, and it's $100. All the whole series on what the future holds for the world. Okay, let's see. What are your thoughts on the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary? Well, there's no such thing as a Cretaceous period. The layers of the Earth are pretty distinct because their tidal changes. Okay, If the tide's coming up and the water's rushing in, it's going to make a layer of rounded gravel. By the way, come to see our gravel pit. How many rounded rocks do we have here, you think? A whole millions and maybe billions, okay? There are 7 layers of gravel in our gravel pit, and it's gravel, sand, clay, a repeating order. Well, if the tide is rushing in, it's going to roll the rocks around and make rounded gravel. Then it's calm for a couple hours, and the sand and clay settle out. Then the tide rushes out and makes another layer of gravel. These gravel layers that begin here in Alabama go all the way to North Carolina. They were all made during the flood by the moon, pulling the water up and down. Actually, holding the water up while we spin under it. To us, it looks like it's going up and down. To the moon, it just stays right there. Okay, so there is no boundary. Kent, what's your thoughts about dark matter? Does it exist or not? I don't think it. How could you know such a thing? I think it's imagination. I think it's to make up for a problem that where'd all the stuff from the Big Bang go? There never was a Big Bang or a rapid expansion or explosion. That's all real baloney. Okay, let's see. I watched an older show, talked about tree rings. Okay. And how it worked. Tree rings would be too soft or too hard. What about the flood? Pre-flood, no growing season, no rings. The tree rings are indication of good time to grow, lots of food, lots of rain, water, lots of sunlight, and they grow a soft ring. Then during difficult times, they grow a hard ring, and it's good because the soft rings keep the tree flexible. The hard rings make it rigid. If it was all soft rings, it couldn't stand up. If it was all hard rings, it would snap and not be able to flex and move in the wind. God puts you and me through hard, good times, bad times, bad times, so you're both flexible and can stand. So would the pre-flood trees have rings? Maybe there's something in the genetic code to produce rings other than just the seasonal stuff. I don't know. Good question. Don't know. Eddie, why is the organic layer of the forest floor only a few feet thick if our forests are hundreds of thousands of years old? Well, the organic material builds up on the forest floor, and you're right, the depth of soil is not enough for millions or billions of years, that's for sure. Dwayne, okay. I know it's off subject, but can you explain the love of money and the root of evil? Well, after God told Adam, you got to work for a living. People ever since then have tried to get out of that, get somebody else to work, and then they steal their stuff. You work hard, buy a Super Dad coffee cup for $12 that somebody gave me, okay? And then somebody says, I'll be glad to steal that. All theft goes back to really, I don't want to work for it. I want you to work for it, and I'll take it. That's what it boils down to. Nearly all the wars are really bigger examples of the same thing. Only it's not one person stealing; it's a whole country trying to steal another country. So yeah, I think the love of money. You could trace just all the evil that's ever happened back to wanting to get out of that curse that God put on Adam. Were the Native Americans still in the Old Testament style of being saved, such as faith in God? Because they surely did not know about Jesus. Good question. There are lots of missionaries who came over here at different times and would testify that many of the Indian tribes did know about the one true spirit. So if God showed them whatever light they had to go on, God will have to be the judge of that. Okay? Ken has a cut on his finger which proves he too is human, like the rest of us, and not a superior species. I got cut on 2 fingers and on my wrist, and let's see, and one on my leg. The chain came off, and it's rough getting old. Well, I'm going to slow down.
Last one.
Probably not going to happen. Okay, last one. Do cows make milkshakes? I don't think I've ever even thought about that. But if a cow does run around and jump around, would a milkshake come out? I doubt it. Okay. See,